"Remove that medal in my courtroom, now." The words echoed through the silent chamber like a gunshot. Every eye turned toward the man standing proudly in his army dress blues. On his chest gleamed a medal of valor, catching the light and deflecting it with the same defiance reflected in his eyes. Staff Sergeant Malik Johnson didn't flinch. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrow beneath bushy brows. Judge Sterling Rowe had a reputation. He didn't tolerate what he called grandstanding. But everyone in this room knew what this was. It wasn't about protocol. It wasn't about decorum. It was about power. And about putting Malik, a Black War hero, in his place. "I said remove it," Judge Rowe barked again, tapping the gavel once. "Or I will hold you in contempt." Malik's attorney started to rise, but the soldier raised one hand, halting him. "I earned this medal," Malik said, voice calm but commanding. "It wasn't handed to me. I didn't buy it. I earned it in Kandahar. I wore it into the worst firefight our unit ever saw. And I'm wearing it now to remind this courtroom what justice is supposed to look like." Murmurs broke out in the gallery. Even the court stenographer paused. Judge Rowe's face turned crimson. "This is not a parade ground, Sergeant. This is a court of law." Malik smiled slightly. "Then perhaps you should act like it." Gasps rippled again. The judge slammed the gavel. "You're dangerously close to obstruction." Malik took a slow breath. His back was straight, his posture unshaken. But behind the calm was a furnace of restrained rage. "This courtroom," Malik said, scanning the faces watching, "was supposed to decide a case about my fellow soldier, wrongfully arrested because he wore his uniform while stopping a robbery. He saved lives. But instead, you've decided I'm the distraction." Judge Rowe scowled. "You have 10 seconds to comply." That was the moment everyone in the room noticed it. Malik had slowly reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a cell phone. He didn't look at the judge. He looked directly into the distance, at nothing and everything, and began to dial. Rowe snapped, "If you make a call in this courtroom, you'll do what?" Malik cut in, voice suddenly sharp. "Fine me? Jail me? Take away something that can't be taken." He raised the medal slightly. "You can't shame me, Your Honor, because this," he pointed to the medal, "was earned in blood, not in a wooden chair behind a desk." The phone rang once, then again. On the third ring, someone answered. A beat of silence. Then Malik said 3 words. "It's happening again." Another pause. Then Malik added, "Yes, sir. I'm at the federal courthouse on Jefferson and Main. Courtroom 7B. You might want to bring everyone." The judge stood, sputtering. "Who are you talking to?" Malik ended the call and finally looked the judge in the eye. "My commanding officer," he said flatly. "General Hawthorne." Several people in the audience stood instinctively. The temperature in the room had dropped. "I gave this country 17 years of service," Malik continued, "and you just spat on all of it with one order. So now, sir, you'll see what happens when a soldier fights back." Rowe looked toward the bailiff. "Remove him now." But neither the bailiff nor the courtroom officers moved. They were frozen. Outside, the faint sound of sirens began to swell. Then more, and more. The courtroom fell completely silent, except for the faint thud of boots in formation approaching from outside. Malik didn't move. He didn't blink. He just whispered, "It's going to be a long day, Your Honor." The judge's lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. Outside the courthouse, the sound of engines revving and boots hitting pavement grew louder. The walls of the courtroom, once a symbol of authority, now felt like they were trembling under the weight of something greater approaching: consequence. Judge Rowe glanced at the bailiff again, more desperately this time. "What are you waiting for? Remove him." But the bailiff shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking between Malik and the courtroom doors. "Sir, I don't think that's going to be possible." The judge leaned forward. "Excuse me." The courtroom doors burst open. 2 soldiers in full combat uniform entered, crisp and composed, M4 rifles slung at their sides, unarmed but undeniably ready. They took position by the double doors like sentries. Everyone turned toward them as a third soldier walked in, a captain judging by his insignia, and approached the bench. He handed something to the judge. Rowe squinted at the envelope, lips tightening as he read the seal. Classified, United States Department of Defense, immediate compliance required. I don't answer to the military, Rowe snapped. Today you do, the captain replied coolly. You issued an unlawful order to a decorated active-duty serviceman under federal protection. That falls under Military Code Title 10, Section 333. The judge's voice cracked. What protection? The captain gestured to Malik. Staff Sergeant Johnson was part of Operation Iron Eagle, a black ops unit that saved 3 U.S. diplomats in 2022. His medal isn't ceremonial, it's classified. By ordering him to remove it, you violated federal confidentiality statutes. Gasps filled the courtroom again. Malik stayed where he was, calm, his hands folded in front of him. You brought this on yourself, he said softly. You couldn't resist humiliating me, not because of a medal, but because of what I represent. Rowe's face was drenched in sweat. This is ridiculous. I won't be intimidated. I am the authority in this room. At that moment, the floor vibrated, ever so slightly. Then the unmistakable sound of synchronized boots echoed from outside, down the marble halls. The press, already catching wind of the incident, had gathered. News cameras peeked through the rear doors. Helicopter blades whirred overhead. This wasn't a courtroom anymore. It was a stage. The double doors swung open again, and in walked General Lucius Hawthorne. 6'3", broad-shouldered, and radiating unshakable command. The general didn't look left or right. He walked down the aisle like it belonged to him, flanked by 4 officers in high-level brass. Every step he took silenced another gasp, another whisper. Judge Rowe, the general said evenly, stepping up to the bench. You've just committed an act of judicial overreach so reckless, the Pentagon had to reroute my aircraft mid-flight. Rowe blinked. This is absurd. You can't just. I can. And I have. Hawthorne interrupted. He turned to the captain. Secure the courtroom. The soldiers moved fast. Doors were locked. Phones confiscated. Reporters pushed back. The entire courtroom was now under military control. Rowe banged his gavel wildly. This is a violation of the Constitution. No, said Hawthorne, his voice now steel. This is the Constitution pushing back. He faced Malik and gave him a nod of deep respect. I came here for one reason, Hawthorne said, loud enough for every microphone to catch. To defend a soldier who already defended us all. Then he turned to the judge and added, and to end the career of the man who thought he could strip a hero's dignity without consequence. The walls of courtroom 7B had never witnessed anything like this. Judge Rowe stood frozen behind the bench, gripping his gavel like a lifeline, but it was useless now. He wasn't in charge anymore. General Lucius Hawthorne stood at center stage not just as a soldier, but as a force of reckoning. I demand you release control of this courtroom immediately, the judge sputtered. You're trespassing on federal judicial grounds. No, Judge, Hawthorne said calmly. You're trespassing on honor. With a curt gesture, the general motioned to his officers. One of them placed a leather-bound file on the judge's bench. Hawthorne nodded. Go ahead. Open it. Rowe hesitated. His hands shook. When he flipped it open, his face drained of color. Inside was a dossier. Not just any dossier. It was a Department of Justice internal audit sealed and restricted to top brass. It detailed over 24 complaints of racial bias tied directly to Rowe. Unjust rulings. Disproportionate sentencing. Cases quietly overturned on appeal with gag orders. And worse, evidence that Rowe had colluded with private correctional facilities for kickbacks, profiting off Black and Latino defendants. You've been under quiet investigation for a while, Hawthorne said, almost casually. We were just waiting for you to slip up in public. You set me up? Rowe whispered. No, said Malik, stepping forward. You set yourself up the moment you thought a medal meant less than a robe. The gallery watched in stunned silence. News cameras had already begun broadcasting from the courthouse steps. Soldiers had secured every exit. Military lawyers arrived with folders. The courthouse's Chief Justice was being rushed into the building by U.S. Marshals. Roe tried to rally. "You have no jurisdiction. This isn't a battlefield." Hawthorne leaned in, voice like thunder wrapped in velvet. "Every courtroom becomes a battlefield the moment you dishonor those who bled for your right to wear that robe." The air tightened. Then the general delivered the fatal blow. Under Executive Military Order 11-73, signed Post 9/11, I'm invoking emergency judicial override. You are hereby relieved of duty, pending immediate federal review. A military officer approached with papers. Judge Sterling Roe, you are ordered to vacate your position. If you resist, you will be placed under arrest. Roe laughed. A bitter, broken sound. You think I'm going to step down because some soldier with a medal got his feelings hurt? Malik stepped forward, voice like a blade. No, Judge. You're going to step down because you abused your bench, disrespected the uniform, and got caught. This isn't about feelings. It's about justice. Roe reached for the gavel again. But this time it wasn't there. One of the soldiers had taken it, placed it neatly beside the file of damning evidence. As Roe looked around for allies, he saw nothing but stone-faced silence. His own clerk refused to meet his gaze. The stenographer had stopped typing. Even the bailiff who once followed his orders now stood with folded arms, unmoving. Outside, the sound of crowds grew. Protesters, veterans, reporters. General Hawthorne looked over his shoulder. Bring in the fines. 2 uniformed auditors rolled in a cart with 3 sealed boxes marked with federal court insignias. Preliminary penalty: $3.2 million in fines for judicial misconduct and violations of military confidentiality, Hawthorne stated. With more pending. Roe's knees buckled. He stumbled back into his seat. But the seat no longer meant power. It meant judgment. And for the first time in his career, Sterling Roe wasn't the one delivering it. The moment the news hit the national wires, America exploded. Federal judge dismissed after ordering black soldier to remove medal. Army general storms courtroom in unprecedented military intervention. Justice or overreach? The courtroom showdown that shocked the nation. Within an hour, every major network was live-streaming footage from outside the Jefferson and Main courthouse. Reporters were shouting over each other, commentators were debating constitutional boundaries, and veterans organizations were calling in support of Staff Sergeant Malik Johnson. Meanwhile, inside the courtroom, Judge Sterling Roe looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He sat slumped in his chair, fingers twitching, jaw clenched tight. His once commanding presence was now a hollow frame, a man who had ruled over thousands now being ruled by the weight of his own actions. Escort him out, General Hawthorne ordered. 2 military police officers stepped forward, but still gave the judge a final chance. I demand a review. I'll appeal. I'll go to the Supreme Court, Roe stammered. Malik didn't say a word. He just stepped aside. The general met Roe's eyes one last time. You're not being silenced, Judge. You're being held accountable. There's a difference. As Roe was escorted past the gallery, people parted silently, some filming, some just watching with quiet judgment. He didn't look up. He couldn't. His arrogance had been peeled away in layers, publicly, permanently. The doors shut behind him with a heavy echo. Then came applause. Not thunderous, not theatrical, but solemn, measured. Veterans, community leaders, activists, and families began clapping. Not in celebration of Roe's fall, but in recognition of Malik's stand. Malik turned and faced the judge's bench, now empty. He stared at it for a long, quiet moment. That bench had once been a throne for unchecked bias. But now it looked just like what it was. A chair waiting for someone worthy to sit in it. Reporters swarmed the exits. Microphones were shoved forward. Sergeant Johnson, how does it feel to be vindicated? Were you expecting this kind of response from the military? Is this the beginning of military oversight in our courts? Malik raised a hand to quiet them. His voice, though calm, cut through the noise like a knife. I didn't come here to start a movement, he said. I came here to defend a fellow soldier who was being railroaded for doing the right thing. But when I was ordered to remove the one thing I bled for, I realized this wasn't just about me. It's about what we tolerate, what we stay silent about." He paused. No more silence. Outside, the crowd roared. Hawthorne stepped beside him and addressed the press directly. Today wasn't a military takeover. It was a correction. Justice must be blind, but it must never be deaf. When a courtroom forgets its duty, then yes, we will remind it what duty looks like. By the time the sun began to set, social media had erupted. Hashtags like #StandWithMalik, #MedalBeforeRobe, and #RoeRemoved were trending worldwide. Memorial halls lit up their facades in red, white, and blue. Veterans groups organized marches in solidarity. Even members of Congress tweeted their support. But Malik wasn't watching the headlines. He sat quietly in a corner of the now empty courtroom, looking down at his medal, not polishing it, not showing it off, just holding it, remembering. His phone buzzed. A message from his mother. "You didn't just fight for your country today. You fought for your people. I'm proud of you." Malik smiled faintly, just once. 1 week later, Washington, D.C. looked different. The Pentagon had been tight-lipped. The White House had issued a brief statement affirming support for accountability in all branches of justice. But across America, Staff Sergeant Malik Johnson had become more than a soldier. He was a symbol. Outside the Lincoln Memorial, a crowd gathered. Not for protest, but for recognition. Veterans in uniform, civil rights leaders, school children holding flags, and families who had lost loved ones in battle stood shoulder to shoulder. At the front stood Malik in full uniform, his medal gleaming. Not out of defiance now, but pride. General Hawthorne took the stage. His voice, usually thunderous, was calm. "Most of us earn medals on the battlefield. But today we recognize a soldier who earned his in a courtroom. A man who stood, not against an enemy overseas, but against injustice at home." He turned toward Malik. "Sergeant Johnson, when Judge Rowe tried to take your medal, he didn't understand what he was trying to strip away. That medal wasn't just for courage. It was a symbol of sacrifice, integrity, and resistance against oppression. You reminded this nation that valor doesn't ask permission." Malik stepped up to the mic. A breeze tugged at the corners of his jacket. Cameras from every major network zoomed in. He took a long breath. "I never wanted to be famous," he began. "I didn't wake up that morning thinking I'd be making headlines. I was just trying to testify for a fellow soldier. But when that judge ordered me to remove my medal, he didn't just question my service. He questioned whether someone who looked like me had the right to wear it in his courtroom." The crowd stood silent, hanging on every word. "I've worn this medal through jungles, deserts, war zones, but it was in that courtroom where it felt the heaviest. Not because of the medal, but because I was carrying every black soldier who was ever told they didn't belong. Every patriot who came home to a country that forgot their name." He paused, looking over the sea of faces, black, white, brown, old, young. "Let me say it clearly," he said, raising the medal into the sunlight. "This medal doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to every person who's ever had to fight twice as hard to be heard once. It belongs to those who weren't lucky enough to have a general storm the courtroom for them. And it belongs to the next generation who need to know that dignity is not something you beg for. It's something you carry, loud, proud, and without apology." The crowd erupted. Tears rolled down cheeks. Flags waved. Salutes snapped into place. Later that night, Malik returned home, quietly, humbly. No cameras, no speeches. As he stepped into his modest apartment, he found a small package on the kitchen table, delivered by Hawthorne's staff. Inside was a plaque, "To Staff Sergeant Malik Johnson, for reminding this nation what justice looks like, when worn across the chest instead of whispered behind closed doors." Malik placed the plaque beside a photo of his father, also a veteran, and finally exhaled. Outside his window, the city moved on. But across the country, something had changed. Courtrooms reviewed their protocols. Judges came under new scrutiny. and young black kids walked a little taller into their classrooms when they learned Malik's story. Because what started as an insult in a courtroom ended as a legend born in its ruins.